Today I'm installing a JessEm Router Lift into the router table and compact table saw cart that I'm building. Watch along and hopefully you can avoid some of the almost catastrophic mistakes I make. Getting right into it, I decided to use my Milwaukee M18 trim router to make this cut. I'm using a Freud half-inch template bit that has a 1-inch long cutting surface. These two things made this process much harder than it needed to be, but more on that in a couple of minutes. Before getting into the routing, I needed to drill holes in the corners to match the radius of the curve of the JessEm top. I've watched and read a bunch of different things and didn't find consensus on what size Forstner bit to use. I ended up going with 1.5 inches and it turned out to be near perfect. I'll attribute any issues in the corners to my lack of skill with the router and not the size of the bit. So I had no end of troubles cutting out the template. I only showed me doing it once, but I think I ruined about 5 templates before I got it right. I'm going to attribute my issues to the fact that the template bit had a 1-inch cutting depth, and given that I was using 3/4 inch plywood template, I had to cut nearly 1/2 inch off on my first pass to make sure that enough of the bearing rode on the template to keep everything straight. I didn't film it, but I ended up cutting the successful template using my Bosch router. I would say if you have the opportunity to get a template bit with a 1/2 or probably even 3/4 inch cutting surface, you might have a lot better luck than I did. I went to town with the painter's tape on the Formica surface. I wanted to make sure I could easily see the outline I traced, and I wasn't too sure if the CA glue I was using would stick to the Formica. The last thing I wanted was the template to slip halfway through routing it out. By using painter's tape on the plywood template, I'll be able to use CA glue and activator, and the template should stick securely to the table, but it should also be easy enough to pull apart when I'm done. Here I'm just rechecking my measurements one more time to make sure that everything is lined up and centered where I want it. The last thing I need to do is cut a crooked hole. Here I'm taking one of the scraps from one of the templates I tried to cut and screwing it down to the middle of the table. There's no issue screwing it here as it will be cut out as waste material. Having it there acts as a support for the router and ensures that it doesn't tip in. Because I'm cutting on the inside of the circle, you go in the opposite direction, clockwise, from what you would do with a normal cut. I want to make sure I'm not cutting too deep. The top of the JessEm lift is 3/8 inch, and I want to be no more than 1/8 inch deeper than that. That will allow me room to use the leveling screws to adjust the surface completely flat with the top. My ideal depth was 7/16 and I was right there. After completing my first pass, I changed directions and hog out another inch or so of material. This will give us a flat surface that is wide enough to rest the top on. And now it's time to see how I did. I will say that peeling the template off is equal parts satisfying and terrifying. Next up, I drill a starter hole so that I can use the jigsaw to remove the waste material from the center, allowing the router lift to drop in place. I held out from buying a Festool dust extractor for a long time, but I have to say, these Bluetooth remotes are worth the price of admission. The edges of the Formica can be pretty sharp, so I hit them with 150 grit sandpaper just to take the edge off. I used the tip of a spade drill bit to mark the center of the hole. I picked up some 13mm long ¼ threaded inserts from Home Depot. I drilled 3/8 inch holes a little deeper than the inserts. I'll say here that it seemed like a good idea to use a bit of CA glue to secure the inserts. I think that in this case, less is more. I made a bit of a mess and it made getting the bolts into the inserts more challenging than it should have been. After test fitting them to make sure everything was okay, it was time to pull them out and install the router. The instructions from JessEm say to push the router all the way into the bottom of the base, where it bottoms out. I did this, and you'll see in a few minutes why that didn't work out and I had to readjust it. In addition to the 4 corner bolts, the JessEm Router Lift comes with 10 leveling screws. The process is pretty straightforward but a little tedious, with having to increase and back off tension on the corner bolts while adjusting the height of the leveling screws individually. Overall, it works pretty well, it's just a little bit fiddly to get it dialed in perfectly. I expected the mechanics of the JessEm lift to be smooth, but I have to say it's basically effortless. At this point, I'm very impressed with the quality of this lift. The router is lifted up high enough to make it easy to exchange bits. No need to use offset wrenches or anything, just the wrenches that came with the router are fine. Here's where I noticed the problem with the install of the router in the lift. With it installed bottomed out into the top of the lift, that doesn't drop low enough for the bit to clear the top of the table, so there's no way to fully recess it in. A simple fix, just unscrewed the bolt holding the router into the lift, dropped the router down a little bit, and made sure that the clearance was good. Thanks for watching along.